It is draft week in Montreal, and the big question on everyone's mind, who will the Montreal Canadiens select with the first overall choice? We're going to try to break it down and figure out who the Canadiens might want to pick on Thursday here on Hockey Inside Out. We're back. I'm Julian McKenzie alongside the usual suspects for Hockey Inside Out. Well, 2/3 of the usual suspects. We know Jessica Rusnak is still on maternity leave. She had her child, though. Shout out Jessica Rusnak. But Rick Green is here. Once upon a time, he was the number one overall pick in the NHL entry draft. Stu Cowan of the Montreal Gazette is here. And tapping in, Andrew Berkshire of the SDPN, as if I don't see your face enough. Good to see you, buddy.
Good to see you too, man.
Okay, so the Montreal Canadiens, they have the number one overall pick in this year's draft. We're all trying to figure out if it's going to be Shane Wright. It could be Uri Slafkovsky. Kent Hughes was talking to the media earlier this week, and he said there may be 3 options. So maybe Logan Cooley might be that third option, or maybe there's someone else we're not even thinking of. It's probably likely those 3 picks, though. Rick, I'll start with you, since you know all about being taken first overall. Who do you think the Canadiens are going to pick first?
Well, let's face it. It's a pretty exciting time for all those names that are mentioned that they're trying to figure out, are they going first, second, third? It's a good situation for Montreal Canadiens to have an opportunity to pick a quality guy, and all directions are pointed towards Shane Wright, who again, I never really saw him play a lot, but there's a lot of very positive feedback on a really good kid, a coachable kid that works hard, and's got a lot of talent that, is probably going to have an impact in the NHL, whether it's sooner than later. But I think the Shane Wright is a guy they're going to lean towards, and, hopefully he'll turn out, because everybody knows it's not always easy to make right choices, and a lot of pressure on the Canadiens organization to do the right thing, and we'll hope that they do the right thing.
Well, Kent Hughes said Monday that he hasn't decided between Wright, Slafkovsky, and Cooley. He said he hasn't decided if he might trade the number 1 pick. He said he hasn't decided anything. I think a lot of that has to do with keeping the suspense building until the draft, since the draft is in Montreal. But there are some signs that it's going to be Shane Wright. When all the top draft prospects were together in Buffalo a couple of weeks ago, Shane Wright's the guy they took out for dinner. Vinny LeCalvier was at the news conference on Monday. He had a phone conversation with one of the top 3 prospects, and that was Shane Wright. So those are signs that lead me to believe that it is going to be Shane Wright. He's one of only 5 players in the OHL who were ever granted exceptional player status to play in that league at 15. And the other, if you look at the list, it's pretty impressive. You got John Tavares, Aaron Ekblad, Connor McDavid, Sean Day, and Shane Wright. The only one of those who isn't a star at some level in the NHL is Sean Day, but his stock had dropped even before the NHL draft. He was a 3rd-round pick by the Rangers. He's only played 2 games in the NHL. So to me, the odds of one of these young guys who's exceptional status at 15 years old to come into the NHL, being a successful player in the NHL, are pretty high. Kent Hughes said yesterday he's seen Shane Wright play hockey, the under 17s as a youth player. He's seen him play a lot. So I think it's going to be Shane Wright. I think Kent Hughes has already decided that, but he also mentioned that they were meeting with all the scouts Monday night and listening to what they had to say. And one thing about Kent Hughes that he's shown, he's a very smart guy, and smart people surround themselves with other smart people and listen to their opinions and take weigh on them before they make their decision. But again, I think it's going to be Shane Wright.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. Shane Wright is the logical pick. I think there's a variety of reasons why. Not that Kent Hughes is a person who is in trouble of getting piled on or anything, but just for a rookie GM, I think to come in and choose the winger over the center when you have a first overall pick at home is a little bit risky. You go back on the last decade of drafts, how many times at the top of the draft has the top winger been better than the top center at the NHL level? Even if you go to the Ovechkin draft, you could make a decent argument that Evgeny Malkin has had as good a career as Alex Ovechkin, even though the goal scoring numbers are not the same. You look at the actual accomplishments on the ice, Malkin's right there. So it's very tough to ignore that center position. But also, I think they're keeping this mystery, obviously, for the surprise on draft day. But just based on what I'm reading between the tea leaves here, I think they're playing chicken a little bit with the New Jersey Devils. The Devils clearly want Slafkovsky. They've got their center line done for their rebuild as far as they're concerned. They want to see if the Devils are willing to give up assets and the second overall pick to move up to number 1. So they could just go to number 2, take those assets, and also pick Shane Wright anyway. I think that's what Kent Hughes would like to do in an ideal world. Probably won't happen because it seems pretty obvious that they're going to take Shane Wright, but that would be a huge move for Kent Hughes. And it seems like he's the kind of guy who will go down to the wire with exactly what he wants and not budge on it just based on how he worked the trade deadline.
Well, I remember when I had a one-on-one interview with Kent Hughes after he got the job, and he was talking about how Vinny Lecavalier was his client before he was the number 1 pick. And Kent Hughes talked about when Vinny called him to tell him that he was going to go with him. And Kent Hughes had a very calm reaction to it. And Vinny said, "What, you're not excited?" And he said, "Hey, I'm going to be your agent. You don't want me to have a poker face?" So it's sort of, I was thinking of that yesterday. He's not going to give up anything. He's going to stay calm and cool heading into this. The other possibility that you wonder is if there's a way Hughes could make a trade with the Devils where the Canadiens get the number 1 and the number 2 pick. And what a way to start things off at the draft at the Bell Center that would be if he could somehow do that.
For sure. I'm glad we're starting the talk already about whether or not Kent Hughes will try to move up in the draft. That's where I really wanted to go next with the conversation. Personally, like the idea of him getting the top 2 picks or 2 of the top 3 picks, I don't necessarily think that's realistic. Even if the New Jersey Devils are biting, I feel as if they would want to give up that second overall pick for a slightly bigger fish, like when Kevin Fiala was available. Maybe that's something that they would want to do. Philip Forsberg, his contract situation seems to be a bit in flux. Maybe you do a sign and trade with him. I don't know if like a Josh Anderson or 26th overall pick from the Canadiens moves the needle nearly as much. But in my opinion, the Canadiens moving up into like the top 15 seems a lot more plausible. Stu, how do you read it?
Yeah, I mean, they have 14 picks going into this draft. They've got a lot of draft picks to play with. You know, they have number 1 and number 26. In the second round, they have number 33 and 62. And then they have 3 picks in the third round and 3 picks in the fourth round. So you could see, you know, they have the first pick, obviously, in the second round overall. And as I've mentioned, 62nd, maybe they want to move up in the second round also. Maybe they want to move up in the first. But he's got a lot of picks, you know, those third and fourth round picks, 3 in each round. You can package things together and maybe move up in that way. So it's going to be a really exciting draft. I'm looking forward to covering it because, especially from a Canadian standpoint, there's going to be a lot of stuff, a lot of possibilities going on. And I'm sure that Kent Hughes' cell phone is going to be ringing. I'm sure it's already ringing, and I'm sure it's going to keep ringing right through, even at the draft table.
Yeah, it seems like they are very interested in moving into the first round, moving up into the first round. I think that number 26 pick from the Flames is very much in play, as is probably both second round picks, right? Like, it'd be interesting to see how much maneuvering Kent Hughes can do, because we saw from the trade deadline how much he was able to accomplish in a tight timeline, right? And obviously negotiations are continuing to go, and it seems like every team has had conversations with Kent Hughes over the last few weeks here. Josh Anderson seems to be the name that's continually out there, not necessarily that the Canadiens are shopping him, but that a ton of teams want him. And if they can unload 5 years of that contract, I think that's going to be a huge deal, especially if the value we're hearing for Josh Anderson is, you know, what can be expected for the return. Because personally, I like Josh Anderson as a person, as a player in the locker room, but as a hockey player on the ice, I think people see the body and the speed, and they see the player that they want to see. And I see that player not putting everything together continually now into his mid-20s. And I don't think there's a high chance that we're going to see him ever be what everyone wants him to be. So I think it makes sense to move a guy like that. One player that I think is very interesting to look at for the Montreal Canadiens, because of the amount of picks that they have, the assets they have to move, is Jesse Puljujarvi out of Edmonton. I'd be very surprised if the Canadiens don't kick tires on him. Mm-hmm. He'd be a perfect replacement for Artturi Lehkonen. Younger, cost-controlled, a little bit more offense in the tank, too.
Interesting. Big body.
Big body.
And I mean, like Stu said, 14 picks. I mean, they have somewhat of a luxury to maybe, move some of those picks to get something that's going to come in and be able to play on their team sooner than later, because there's some chance that a lot of those late picks will actually turn out to be something that the Canadiens can use down the road. So they're in a good position. I'm sure that the phone is ringing quite a bit to see about what they can do, if anything, to move up a little bit. And they, like I said, they have the luxury of having a lot of picks that maybe some other organizations would take a stab at to find a player that can help their hockey club.
We'll talk about those third round picks. Kent Hughes was talking on Monday about Brad Marchand, the Bruins, a third round draft pick, and saying how he's the most impressive player he's ever seen as far as continuing to get better. 34 years old, he's still getting better, still improving, still adding things to his games. Brendan Gallagher is a fifth round pick. Those late round picks, and the NHL draft's a crapshoot. You never know what you're going to get in the third round, fourth round, fifth round. You just look through some of the players in the NHL that have been later round draft picks. Marty St. Louis was never drafted, right? Hall of Fame player. So there's value to those third, fourth round picks, and Kent Hughes knows that, and the other GMs know that. So again, it's gonna be interesting to see how he works with all of these. He's got a full hand going into this draft, which is going to be really interesting to see how he plays the cards.
And one other factor that we can't ignore is they might want to add first round picks. Maybe not in this draft. Maybe Kent Hughes is still looking for more first round picks in the next draft, because the more chances you can give yourself to not only have a chance in the lottery to get a Connor Bedard or a Matvei Michkov, or just have more picks there to trade up to get into that territory, the better. The Canadiens very clearly need a high-end superstar player to become a contender, right? They need something out of next year's draft. So I would not be surprised if we see some trades similar to the Ben Sherratt trade, where you're trying to bank on a team that thinks they're amazing, but might fall off a little bit the next year.
Looking like we're going to be in for some exciting times with Kent Hughes and the Montreal Canadiens over the next few days. I just want one last draft question, and literally, like, off air, like before we started talking about all these like Canadiens misses and all that. Like, we could get lost in draft talk for about 5-6 hours. So I'll try to keep us on topic for this one here. But for this last draft question I have here, do you think the Canadiens will end up with a highly rated Quebecer among their draft haul? Guys like Nathan Gaucher are available, could be available if the Canadiens hold on to their 26th pick. Other guys like Tristan Luneau or Noah Warren are also options in possibly the second or the third round. Andrew, I'll start with you on this one. How do you see that playing out?
I mean, if you would have asked me 10 years ago if the Canadiens should be going after drafting Quebecers, I'd probably roll my eyes a little bit. But I've changed my viewpoint a little bit just based on how many major misses they've had in their own backyard, and watching, how key Phil Deneau was to their cup run in 2021, and how much that feeling meant to the people here in Montreal and across Quebec. Having some local players in the fold makes a lot of sense, and it does matter. You look at the excitement around Joshua Waugh. It matters, and I'm not saying they should take a Quebecer over a player who's obviously better, but if an opportunity falls to them where they can take a high-profile Quebec-born talent, I think they should absolutely not be afraid to do that. I think it's a big thing for this organization. If you can have a Quebec-born superstar, I think you just see the Montreal Canadiens take off in this market. And not to say that they're not going to sell out and everything like that, but I think the Canadiens in the last 5-6 years have not been the be-all, end-all of all entertainment in Montreal that they were for the decade before that. And there's a reason for that. And it's not all just not having Quebecers, but the team hasn't been exciting. And if you can have an exciting Quebec-born superstar, man, that's just the pièce de résistance.
And it would be great to see some local talent be given the opportunity. And it depends on a lot of time positioning. Mention a few names there. Nate Gauthier, the guy's 6'3". What about this kid Lamoureux that plays in Drummondville? He's 6'7". I mean, all these kids. Noah Warren, 6'5". I mean, huge guys that. I guess the feeling is they have some potential to become good players. It would be nice if these type of guys would be given an opportunity as French Quebec-born players to step into the mix. But I think a lot depends on the depth in position and whether or not they have their scouting staff that really is high on these guys and think that maybe these would be guys that they like to have in their mix of player personnel.
Yeah, and Andrew, you make a good point. I mean, they've had so many misses in their own backyard over the years in Quebec. Patrice Bergeron's one. Claude Giroux, Claude Giroux was drafted 22nd overall in 2006. 2 picks before that, the Canadiens took David Fisher. So, they've missed a lot of guys in their own backyard that you would think they would be more heavily scouted than elsewhere. Claude Giroux played in Hull with an hour and a half drive or whatever from Montreal. Other teams have missed on these guys also, but I agree with what you're saying. If you look at how the Laval Rocket did this season with so many Quebec players, so many Francophone players on the roster, and they talked about it. They just have an extra sense of pride playing in front of their own fans and playing in front of families and playing in their own province. And, go back to the last 2 Canadian Stanley Cups in 86, it was written 93. There were a lot of Francophones on the team. And Serge Savard in his book wrote about how important it is to have guys who really connect with the community. The problem now is that there's just not that many Quebecers in the NHL anymore. Never mind on the Canadiens. The Hockey Quebec's had a big problem in developing players who can play in the NHL. But you bring up Gaucher, Nathan Gaucher, the 6'3" center with the Ramparts, ranked number 16 in North America by Central Scouting. That falls right into a round. The Canadiens have that number 26 pick. So he's a guy, there's a very good chance he could be available at that spot. And again, if you don't take a kid like that and you miss on a homegrown guy again, it doesn't look good. And Andrew, make another good point. It's a lot of it now is with marketing with the Canadiens. Chantal Machabie was brought in to improve relations with the media and make the players more accessible to the public. And I think it's in the back of their mind. I don't think they're going to draft somebody just because he's a Quebecer. But if they have Gaucher and another player, if Gaucher's available, they have another player who are basically rated about the same, I think it makes sense to go with the local guy. Plus, he's a center. He's a big guy. Could fit in there. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that. But, Hockey Quebec is a bigger problem right now than the Canadiens have as far as when it comes to bringing in French players. And as you mentioned too, Philippe Deneau, the way he played in the playoffs and the way he played, I still can't believe they let Philippe Deneau go on a team that stresses it's the importance of having Francophone players, and they let the best guy that they had and one of the best two-way centers in the NHL leave. So it's going to be interesting to see. And as Rick mentioned also, that Maverick Lamoureux, 6'7" defenseman from Drummondville, big guy. Just another interesting thing to watch at this draft is what the Canadiens do with the local guys.
Yeah.
Go
ahead, Rick.
Sorry, no, I was just going to say it's fair to say that there's some Quebec-born players, they don't want to play here in this environment. And, again, that's a little bit of a crapshoot as far as if you do pick a guy like that and they feel that real extra pressure of being a local guy playing in front of all the relatives and family, and they just can't put their A game together consistently. And, I wonder about Jonathan Drouin. We haven't heard too much about him or talked about him too much. And, I really believe that this environment is, and again, a lot of times it's brought on by the individual, but the bottom line is if you can't perform in this environment, then hey, that's too bad. It is what it is. And there's some kids that can't do it. And there's a little bit of a, guessing game on the personality of the individuals to see if the local guys can play with this pressure in their home city.
And Guillaume Leclerc is sort of the poster board for that, right? The local kid being drafted in the first round and all the pressure on him. And, Stéphane Richer, who last 50 goal scorer with the Canadiens, has talked about the pressure he felt in Montreal too as a Francophone playing here. And, Kent Hughes spoke Monday about being drafted number 1 overall in the NHL is a lot of pressure. There's even more pressure when it's in Montreal. And that's one of the things that they're factoring into who they pick. Is whoever we pick can be able to handle that constant pressure of being in the Montreal spotlight. And it's something I think the Canadiens need to do a better job moving forward of surrounding these young guys and supporting them. You think back to Carey Price, not a Francophone, obviously, but a guy who was drafted first overall and just left to live by himself in Montreal and in the big spotlight without, you look the other way, Sidney Crosby living with Mario Lemieux. And I think the Canadiens moving forward are more aware of that now. I think Kent Hughes will be interesting to see how they sort of are able to shelter some of these younger guys and make the spotlight maybe a little bit less bright.
Yeah.
And to your point about trying to make that easy, I think that's what makes having a guy like Vinny Lecavalier in your front office like a good move. Fine, he was not a number 1 overall pick for the Montreal Canadiens, but he was still a number 1 overall pick from Quebec, and he knows all about the pressures of being a number 1 overall pick. I think like the Tampa Bay owner at the time
on draft day was called the Michael Jordan of
Michael
hockey
Jordan.
by his GM.
Yeah,
the owner of the Lightning said we just drafted the Michael Jordan of hockey, and Lecavalier spoke with like Monday, and he had high praise for Jacques Demers, who was coaching Tampa at the time, and he was able to go, whoa, let's lower the bar here a little bit. The kid's 18 years old, and Lecavalier said how Demers put no pressure on him. His first season, he put him on the third line with 2 veteran wingers to help him out and bring him along slowly. But again, the spotlight in Tampa is nowhere near, especially back then. Tampa was a horrible hockey team with not the fan base they have now. But even then, Vinny Lecavalier talked about how Jacques Demers was able to shelter him a little bit and take a lot of pressure off and not expect him to be the big star on the team. As you said, start off as a third liner and work your way up. So it's not easy anywhere when you're a number 1 pick, but in Montreal, the last time was Doug Wickenheiser, right?
Yeah, that is actually very true. But I just want to add this final point here. Like, it's such an interesting debate with the Canadiens and picking the best player available or the best Quebec-born player available because, yeah, we've seen it with the Laval Rocket and how Joshua Roy played with them and just having young guys in the organization who are French-speaking, it matters to those players. And like, I know there are some people who think, oh, you know what, they don't want to be here, but I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of guys, even if they might not be first-round picks, they want that opportunity to play for the Montreal Canadiens. So it's not necessarily an exact science. And then you go back to the 2009 draft where the Canadiens said, okay, we're going to pick the best possible Quebec guy we could take. And Chris Kreider goes right after. Look, Andrew and I were talking about this off air. I understand the Canadiens missed out on Patrice Bergeron in 2003, and they really should have taken him instead of Corey Urquhart. But if the Canadian, I maintain the miss on Chris Kreider is the worst miss they could have made all century. It literally impacted the health of their franchise goaltender, and who knows where Carey Price would be for the Montreal Canadiens now if Chris Kreider was scoring 50 goals for their team as he did last year, or at least close to it with the New York Rangers this past year, and not in a Montreal Canadiens uniform. Like it's I don't know. It's such a tough thing to do if you're a Canadiens front office and you're trying to, toe the line between making sure you make a certain section of fans happy while also getting the best player. Just get the best player available. And hey, considering the fact they have 2 first-round picks, it could work out for them where they could get a Shane Wright or a Nathan Gaucher. That's the point I just want to bring to the forefront here.
Well, I think that point also illustrates like how important development is in this like quixotic situation
100%.
of drafting, right? Because Louis LeBlanc, yes, total bust, only played 50 games in the NHL. However, his first year in the American Hockey League, he actually was very good. His first cup of coffee in the NHL, actually very good. And then Sylvain Lefebvre decided that he would play Louis LeBlanc with Zach Stortini in the American Hockey League. And he wanted LeBlanc to get tougher, and he started getting into fights, and he broke his hand. And all of a sudden, those bad choices pushing players into being what they're not going to be comes back and bites you, and he flamed out very quickly. So having a team or an organization with their head on straight about how to develop players properly and accentuate their skills while not, like compensating for the weaknesses without diminishing their skills is going to be a big thing for the Montreal Canadiens moving forward. And I think they're on the right track in that situation. And that's also going to be something that attracts players to the organization, right? They'll want to play for the Montreal Canadiens in the way that they conduct themselves, if the way that they conduct themselves is in a more professional manner, whereas the last 10 years or so, not so great in terms of development. And some of the issues with players have come to light in contract negotiations and trades. Not everyone was treated very well.
No. Well, I mentioned earlier Guillaume Latendresse as a poster boy. I mean, Louis LeBlanc's probably even a better poster boy. And as you mentioned with development, he should have been left at Harvard. These Canadiens
100%.
leave Harvard, and then they put him with the Montreal Rocket with a bright spotlight on him playing there. They should have just left him in Harvard. He should have stayed there and given him more time to develop away from the Montreal spotlight. It definitely would have helped him, and it hurt him what they did. They didn't handle him properly, and that goes with a lot of these young prospects. The Canadiens have not handled them well. And that's one of the reasons. Is it bad drafting or is it bad development? It's a combination of both.
And I think it's fair to say that a lot of these kids, their personalities are quite different and unique in a special way. One's that you can work with on the player development side. One guy might be able to handle it. One guy might not be able to handle it. One might take a little more time. But I think it's something you have to have a real feel for each and every guy that they do bring in the organization, that you handle each one uniquely and allow them to progress and touch all the right buttons to make them better people, better athletes, and ultimately, real good players.
Ken Hughes touched on that yesterday. He said when his early days as a player agent, one of the mistakes he made is he always thought, if this kid just gets this coaching and works on this, he'll be fine. But not every kid is willing to put in the work or do the things that the coaches want them to do either. So it's a two-way street. Okay, last one for our episode here. Like I said, we could talk about the draft for hours upon hours here. I want to talk about Luke Richardson, who has been a discussion topic on this show many a time for what he's done behind the bench for the Montreal Canadiens. He has since joined Chicago as their new head coach. I think this is going to be an interesting debate because I think people think of Luke Richardson. Some people think of him a little bit more highly. Some people don't think of him as highly enough, you think. With the defensive prospects in the system and the way the defense core looks now, I'm wondering, and I'll start with you, Rick, since you know all about defense. How big of a loss will Luke Richardson leaving the Canadiens organization be with the way the Canadiens defense looks right now?
Well, let's face it. He's a quality, respected guy that, did a lot of good things with these young defensemen. And I'm really happy. If this is what he wanted to do, the route he wanted to pursue is get a head coaching job. Congratulations to him, and I wish him all the best of luck in that. Now, as far as filling the void, yes, they've got some work to do to bring somebody in there and work with these kids or continue to work with these kids. But the bottom line in all this too is these kids, most of them today are really smart players. You have to just kind of fine tune them. My experience is you as an assistant, it's a great position because you will get to be really close with these guys. You're as close to being a player as you can be. And they need to find somebody that has a really good relationship with all of those guys back there. And, they'll find one. Yes, there's a void. But I believe that they'll be able to fill that void with somebody that will, continue with a good working relationship to keep these kids on the straight and narrow and help them progress in a good way. Well, it was just a matter of time before Luke Richardson became a head coach in the NHL, and it wasn't going to be in Montreal because of the language issue. I think if he was bilingual, he would have been named head coach, or at least interim head coach, when they fired Dominic Ducharme this season. That wasn't going to happen. People want to know how much Luke Richardson meant to the young defenseman. Just speak with Alexander Romanov. Watching practices in Brossard last couple of years, and see Richardson working with them before practice, during practice, after practice, talking with them. And Romanov loved working with him, and Richardson loved working with Romanov also. Ben Sherratt last year in the playoffs, when Richardson took over as head coach after Ducharme tested positive for COVID, said everybody on this team would skate through a wall for Luke Richardson, and especially the defenseman. Well-respected guy throughout the league, liked by his players. Jeff Petrie talked about how much Sherratt meant, how much Richardson meant to him, because he said he was the first coach he ever had that wasn't screaming and yelling at you on the bench after you made a mistake. He was calm and cool, and it was all positive. And then the next day, or out in the intermission on video, showing what had gone wrong, what had broken down. So I think he's a real modern day coach. I think he can relate to the younger players. I think he has that respect that he played 21 years in the NHL. I remember asking Romanov once if he had ever gone back and watched YouTube video of Richardson, who was as tough as they came. And Rick would vouch for that. And he was like, wow, he couldn't believe, some of the fights he was in and whatnot. So I think he's just a guy who was so well respected. He leaves a big void too, because he was the only guy with really a lot of NHL experience behind the bench. He'd been assistant coach for a long time. He was also a head coach for 4 years in the AHL. He knew how to run a bench. Marty St. Louis talked about when he first took over the job, how fast things were moving the bench and how much he relied on Richardson to sort of help him out and slow things down a bit. So whoever the Canadiens hire to replace him, I think they've got to find somebody with a lot of NHL bench experience, whether it's as a head coach or as an assistant coach, because
there's not a lot of experience behind that bench with St. Louis and his other assistants. So I think that's going to be a key.
Yeah, I agree with you both that where you're going to feel Richardson's loss is, in the room, the camaraderie that he had with the players. I agree 100% that when he took over as head coach, when Ducharme had COVID, the team played different. Like it seemed like they got an extra gear when Richardson was in charge, which probably should have been a warning sign for what was going to happen the following year. But at the same time, we have to also examine Richardson's results, right? After the last 4 years in Montreal, if you combine the Canadiens' 4 years of penalty killing results, which is what he was responsible for, they finished 25th in the league. Part of that's personnel, sure, but Richardson hasn't had a top 10 penalty kill in his career since I think it was his second year in Ottawa as an assistant. So he's never really been great at creating a good penalty kill structure. And I wasn't actually a huge fan of how he ran the defense in terms of pairings and who got the most ice time over the last 4 years. So I think there's always that balance with coaches, right? Where you can have a great guy who the players love, but may not necessarily be excellent at his actual job on the ice, right? And I think that if they can find somebody who can bring what Luke Richardson does in terms of respect and bringing the players to the next level while also having a bit better results on the ice, this could actually be a positive move.
Well, the thing is, you mentioned the PK. The most important player on your PK is your goalie. And the Canadiens have had problems in goal with inconsistency with Carey Price. And last season, we know what a mess. But when Carey Price was on his game in the playoffs last season, their PK is one of the reasons they went to the Stanley Cup final. Their PK was outstanding.
Right, because he was saving 98% of the shots. It's a little bit different. Like in terms of allowing scoring chances, they still weren't that good.
Mm-hmm. But and again, with the assistant coach, he has a say in the system the team plays, but it's not his system, right? And as you mentioned, Andrew, when he took over from Ducharme in the playoffs, there was a spark that was there. Like it wasn't just Carey Price anymore, keeping them in games. And I wonder how much, the bad start to this season, I wonder how much I wonder what happened in the exit meetings last year. How many players expressed to Marc Bergevin that maybe Dominic Ducharme isn't the right guy, like the system that he was trying to put through. And when they came back this season and Ducharme had the new 3-year contract, I wonder how much of that played. Jeff Petrie was open about how frustrated guys were with the system and how he wouldn't change it. And you wonder if maybe that's why the players responded the way they did when Luke Richardson took over as head coach. And that's also why I think if Richardson was bilingual, when they fired Ducharme this year, if they wouldn't have made him at least the interim head coach until the end of the season and then see what they were going to do. But maybe the plan all along was to bring in Marty St. Louis. I don't know. I can't get inside Kent Hughes' head. But as I mentioned, it was just a matter of time before Luke Richardson was going to be a head coach. I think Chicago is a good situation for him. It's a young, rebuilding team. As I mentioned, he's a player's coach. He can relate to the younger guys. He's going to have his work cut out for him. It's not going to be a very good team. But I think he can relate to the young guys in Chicago. I think he can relate to the star players in Chicago, Tays and those guys. So I think it's a good fit for him.
I think we're going to find out that Luke Richardson is a better head coach than an assistant coach. That's my guess.
Good. That's a good.
It's a big change as far as responsibility and relationships go. It's no longer, like I said, as an assistant, you get really close to the players and you're almost like one of their buddies, so to speak. And then the head guy has to come down with a little bit more of a force. But in today's game, the players basically run the show. So you have to find that happy medium where you can maximize each and every guy, differently and, hopefully get the most out of them.
Yeah, and the key to the head coach, as you mentioned, was you got to get players to believe in you and buy into what you're selling. And that's what happened with Marty St. Louis. He came in and he revamped the system the players wanted to play. They liked playing it. They worked hard for him. They respected him behind the bench. And I think it'll be a similar situation in Chicago with Luke Richardson.
I'll say this with Luke Richardson, too. You mentioned Tays and Kane. That roster is rebuilding. Who knows how long those two players will be around? They're looking to offload Alex DeBrincat. So Luke Richardson is not going to have the Chicago team of old with all those teams that won those cups, but it could also be a blessing in disguise in the fact that he might get a little bit more leash to kind of run around and try to help rebuild this team, get to another era in its team history.
Yeah, and Weidman was, I read on stories with Chris Weidman after Blackhawks hired him. He said, if it wasn't for Luke Richardson, I'd be working a desk job somewhere, because he was his head coach in the AHL the Senators organization. He said he just taught me like how to play the game at the NHL level. And Ben Sherratt said the same thing. Ben Sherratt said I wouldn't be the player I am now without the work that Luke Richardson did with me, and Romanov would say the same thing. So he's as I said, he's a good man. He's a good coach, and I'm always happy when good things happen to good people. So I was happy to see him get the head coaching job in Chicago.
And
All right.
Let's face it.
Go ahead, Rick.
One more point here. I just want to make that, they obviously felt some kind of positive feel for Luke Richardson because they wanted to keep him on when the team was struggling, let Ducharme go. They very easily could have let the whole coaching staff go and say, you know what, this is totally unacceptable in so many areas that we need a whole cleanup of our coaching staff. That didn't happen. Now Luke has been given an opportunity to show his worth, and I hope he does.
And that's going to do it for this week's edition of Hockey Inside Out. You can tell we haven't spoken to each other in a while, considering all of the conversations went. But obviously, missing your faces, guys. And I'm glad we were able to do this again. Subscribe to the Hockey Inside Out show on YouTube. And be sure to sign up for the Hockey Inside Out newsletter at MontrealGazette.com/newsletters. And of course, visit HockeyInsideOut.com to check out our full episode, join the discussion in the comment section, and be on the lookout for our bonus videos to come. Peace.